The millionaire faints upon seeing the beggar's necklace. In the heart of bustling New York City, on Fifth Avenue, stood the imposing headquarters of Liberty Enterprises, a financial empire ruled with an iron fist by Michael Walden. At 45, Michael was the epitome of success. Tall, distinguished, with black hair streaked with silver and piercing blue eyes, his impeccable, custom-tailored suits concealed a story marked by ambition, determination, and personal sacrifices. On this late autumn morning, Michael was preparing for another workday. His gaze wandered over the city skyline as his thoughts drifted to his younger brother, Robert, who had disappeared without a trace 12 years ago. Although the investigation had long been closed, Michael could never accept the idea that Robert was dead. Each year, on the anniversary of his brother's disappearance, he would retreat to his private office, leafing through old investigation files, searching for a clue he might have missed. His secretary, Jennifer Parker, an efficient woman in her early 30s, interrupted Michael's train of thought. "Mr. Walden, your car is waiting. You have the meeting with the German investors at 10 a.m. Michael picked up his fine leather briefcase and headed for the elevator. On his way to the car, he decided to walk a few blocks to clear his mind. The crisp morning air invigorated his senses as he traversed the crowded streets of Manhattan. At the corner of Madison Avenue and 57th Street, Michael was stopped by a beggar. The man, dressed in tattered clothes and with a tangled beard, held out a trembling hand. "Please, sir, do you have any food? I haven't eaten since yesterday." Michael was used to being approached by homeless people, but something about this man caught his attention. The beggar's eyes, though clouded with confusion, had a familiar golden-green hue. Michael's gaze dropped to the man's neck, where he saw a necklace with a crescent-shaped pendant. Michael's heart began to race. That necklace, it was identical to the one Robert had worn on the day of his disappearance, a gift from their grandmother, a family heirloom passed down through generations. "Sir," Michael said, his voice trembling slightly, "where did you get this necklace?" The beggar raised his hand to his neck, touching the pendant with a confused expression. "The necklace? I don't remember. I've always had it, I think." Michael felt his head spin. Was it possible that this homeless man was his lost brother? Or was it just a cruel coincidence? "What's your name?" Michael asked, trying to keep his calm. The man furrowed his brow as if trying to remember something very important but inaccessible. I don't know. People on the street call me Steve, but I'm not sure if that's my real name." Michael felt his breath catch. The possibility that this man could be his lost brother was becoming more and more real. But how was it possible? And why couldn't he remember anything? "Steve," Michael said, trying to control his emotions, "I'd like to help you. Come with me, please. I'll offer you a warm meal and clean clothes. And if you agree, I'd like to do some medical tests." The beggar, perhaps Robert, hesitated for a moment, looking around warily. Then, as if making a sudden decision, he nodded. "All right, sir, thank you for your kindness." As they headed towards Michael's car, the millionaire felt his entire world shaking. If this man was indeed his brother, what had happened in the last 12 years? And how had he ended up in this state? Michael knew that days full of uncertainty and intense emotions lay ahead, but he was determined to find out the truth, regardless of the consequences. For the first time in many years, he felt that the hope of finding his brother had not been in vain. As the black limousine traversed the busy streets of New York, Michael couldn't take his eyes off the man seated next to him. The beggar, whom he continued to think of as Steve, looked out the window with a lost expression, as if seeing the city for the first time. Arriving at the imposing Walden family mansion in the Hamptons, Michael led Steve inside. The elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, who had worked for the family for over 3 decades, gaped when she saw them enter. "Good heavens," she exclaimed, crossing herself. "Mr. Michael, it's like seeing Mr. Robert." Michael gestured for her to be quiet, fearing to frighten Steve. He led him upstairs to one of the guest rooms. "Steve, you can rest and freshen up here. I'll call a doctor to examine you if you agree." The man nodded, looking around in amazement. "It's so beautiful here. But why are you helping me? You don't know me." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "Maybe I know you better than you think. Rest now, we'll talk later." Leaving Steve in the care of the housekeeper, Michael retreated to his office. With trembling hands, he dialed the number of Dr. Andrew Montgomery, a renowned neurologist and old family friend. "Andrew, I urgently need your help. I think I've found Robert." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Michael, I know how much you've wanted to find him, but—" "No, Andrew, listen to me," Michael interrupted. "There's a man who looks strikingly like Robert and wears the family necklace. But he doesn't remember anything from his past. I need you to examine him and run DNA tests." Dr. Montgomery promised he would arrive as soon as possible. While waiting for him, Michael immersed himself in memories. He saw himself as a child, running through the mansion's garden alongside Robert. His younger brother had always been the life of the party, full of energy and with an infectious smile. How could that cheerful boy have become a homeless man with no memories? His thoughts were interrupted by Dr. Montgomery's arrival. After a brief consultation, the doctor came down to Michael's office with a grave expression. "Michael, this man is suffering from a rare and aggressive form of early-onset Alzheimer's. It's a fascinating case from a medical standpoint, but terribly sad. His long-term memory seems to have been almost completely erased." Michael felt his heart breaking. "Is there any chance he'll regain his memories?" The doctor sighed. "It's hard to say. We'll do more detailed tests and try different treatments, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that your brother may never remember who he was." In the days that followed, Michael completely neglected his business, dedicating himself to caring for Steve. The DNA test results confirmed what Michael had already suspected. The man was indeed his missing brother, Robert Walden. The news spread like wildfire through New York's high society. The press buzzed, speculating about the mysterious disappearance and reappearance of Michael Walden's brother. But for Michael, all of this was secondary. The only thing that mattered was helping Robert regain his health and perhaps his memories. One evening, as they sat on the mansion's terrace watching the sunset, Robert, for Michael now called him that, said quietly, "Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see images. Narrow streets, old buildings, and I smell a strong scent of coffee and spices." Michael started. "New Orleans! That's where you disappeared, Robert. You were on vacation in the French Quarter when you didn't come back." For a moment, Robert's eyes lit up, as if recognizing something. But then, the fog of confusion settled over his gaze again. "I'm sorry, brother," he whispered. "I wish I could remember." Michael squeezed his shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll go to New Orleans together. Maybe if you see those places, your memory will awaken." As night fell over the Hamptons, Michael began to plan the trip to New Orleans. He didn't know what they would discover there, but he was determined to find out the truth about his brother's lost 12 years, regardless of the emotional cost. New Orleans welcomed the two brothers with mild autumn sunshine and the spicy aroma of Cajun cuisine. Michael had reserved a luxurious suite at the Hotel Monteleone, overlooking the French Quarter. Robert watched, fascinated, as the crowds bustled along Bourbon Street, as if seeing it all for the first time. "Does anything feel familiar?" Michael asked hopefully. Robert shook his head, frustrated. "Everything seems new and old at the same time. It's strange." In the days that followed, the two brothers roamed the French Quarter, visited Jackson Square, and strolled along the Mississippi River. Robert seemed to enjoy every moment, but memories still refused to return. One evening, as they walked through the narrow streets of the quarter, Robert suddenly stopped in front of a small cafe, hidden between two historic buildings. "Café du Monde," he murmured, looking at the old sign. Michael felt his heart start to beat faster. "Do you remember anything about this place?" Robert put his hand to his temple as if trying to catch a fleeting memory. "I'm not sure, but the smell of coffee and beignets seems so familiar." They entered the small cafe, where time seemed to have stood still. The walls were covered with old photographs of New Orleans, and the air was filled with the intense aroma of freshly ground coffee. An elderly woman with grey hair tied in a bun came to greet them. When she saw Robert, her eyes widened in surprise. "Good Lord! Robert, is that you?" Robert looked at her in confusion while Michael stepped forward. "You know my brother?" The woman put her hand to her mouth. "Your brother? But Robert told us he had no family. He worked here at the cafe for almost a year about 10 years ago." Michael felt his breath catch. Finally, a concrete lead about Robert's past. "Please, ma'am, tell us everything you know." They sat at a table while the cafe owner, Mrs. Laveau, told them tearfully, "Robert showed up at the cafe door one day, disoriented and exhausted. He couldn't remember anything about his past, just his name. I took him under my wing, gave him a job in a small room above the cafe. He was a wonderful boy, hard-working and kind to everyone." Robert listened to the story with an expression of amazement and confusion, trying to catch fragments of his own past. "But what happened?" Michael asked, eager to learn more. Mrs. Laveau sighed deeply. "One day, about 9 years ago, Robert disappeared as mysteriously as he had appeared. He left only a note apologizing and saying he had to leave, that he felt there was something important he had to do. I thought maybe he had regained his memory, but it seems that wasn't the case." Michael felt a mix of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was grateful to have finally found a connection to Robert's past. On the other hand, the fact that his brother had lived so close, without remembering his family, made him feel a pit in his stomach. "Mrs. Laveau," Robert said slowly, looking around, "do you happen to have any photographs of me from that time?" The woman nodded affirmatively and stood up, disappearing behind the counter for a few moments. She returned with a faded photograph, which she handed to Robert with trembling hands. In the image, a younger Robert smiled broadly, standing in front of the cafe alongside Mrs. Laveau and several other employees. He wore an apron and held a tray of beignets. Robert looked at the photograph for a long time, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I left you like that without any explanation." Mrs. Laveau squeezed his hand affectionately. "Don't worry, my dear, I'm so happy to see you again, to know you're all right." Michael felt the need to learn more. "Mrs. Laveau, do you remember if Robert ever mentioned anything about his past, or if he received any suspicious visits or phone calls while he worked here?" The woman thought for a few moments. "No, Robert was very discreet about his past. But now that I think about it, there was a regular customer who seemed very interested in him, a well-dressed man with a distinguished air. He would come often and sit for hours, observing Robert. I thought maybe he was in love with him," she added with a slight smile. Michael felt a chill down his spine. Who was this mysterious observer? And what connection did he have to Robert's disappearance? "Do you remember what this man looked like?" he asked, trying to keep his calm. He was an older gentleman with grey hair and a well-groomed beard. He had a thin scar above his left eyebrow, and he always wore a ring with a green stone on his little finger. The description meant nothing to Michael, but he was determined to investigate further. He turned to his brother, who was still looking at the photograph with a lost expression. "Robert, do you remember anything about this man, or about the time you spent here?" Robert shook his head, frustrated. "The place seems familiar, the smells, the atmosphere, but I don't remember specific events. It's like I'm looking at someone else's life." Michael squeezed his shoulder encouragingly. "Don't worry, we'll uncover the truth, step by step." As they left the cafe, thanking Mrs. Laveau for the information, Michael felt he was on the edge of an abyss. Each answer seemed to bring dozens of new questions. Who was the mysterious observer? Why had Robert left New Orleans so suddenly? And more importantly, what had happened in the years that followed, until Michael found him begging on the streets of New York? With a head full of thoughts and theories, Michael was determined to continue the investigation. The next step was to find a way to identify the mysterious man who had been watching Robert. Perhaps he held the key to the entire mystery. As they headed back to the hotel, Robert suddenly stopped, looking into the distance. "Michael," he said in a trembling voice, "I think I remember something. A boat. A white boat with a red sail." Michael looked at him in surprise. "A boat? Are you sure?" Robert nodded, trying to catch the fleeting memory. "Yes, and a name. Aurora." The boat was called Aurora. It was the first concrete memory Robert had from the period of his disappearance. Michael felt hope ignite again in his chest. Perhaps, little by little, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. "Tomorrow we'll go to the harbor," Michael said determinedly. "We'll try to find out more about this boat, Aurora. Maybe it will lead us to the next clue." As night fell over New Orleans, the two brothers headed back to the hotel, each lost in their own thoughts. Michael was determined to solve the mystery of Robert's disappearance, no matter where this search might lead them. Robert, on the other hand, felt a mixture of fear and curiosity about his own unknown past. What secrets did Robert's past hide? And what dangers awaited them as they got closer to the truth? The answers to these questions were about to unfold in the coming days, forever changing the lives of the two brothers and those around them. The next morning found Michael and Robert at the port of New Orleans, examining every boat and yacht in search of the mysterious Aurora. The salty sea breeze and the cries of seagulls filled the air as the two brothers made their way among vessels of all sizes. After hours of fruitless searching, they were about to give up when Robert suddenly stopped in front of a small nautical equipment store. "Michael, look!" he exclaimed, pointing to the dusty window. There, in an almost overlooked corner, was a yellowed photograph. It showed a sailboat, white with a red sail, and bore the inscription, "Aurora, 1998. They hurried into the store, where an old man with a weather-beaten face and piercing blue eyes greeted them with a toothless smile. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked, studying them curiously. Michael pointed to the photograph in the window. "We're interested in information about the boat in this image, Aurora. Do you know anything about it?" The old man furrowed his bushy eyebrows. "Aurora? Well, I haven't heard of her in years. She was Thomas Varley's boat. A strange fellow who used to come around here often. But he disappeared at sea about 9 or 10 years ago along with the boat." Robert flinched at these words, and Michael felt a chill down his spine. The coincidence was too great to ignore. "This Thomas Varley?" Michael asked in a controlled voice. "What did he look like?" The old man scratched his beard, thoughtful. He was an older gentleman, distinguished. Grey hair, well-groomed beard. And he had a thin scar above his left eyebrow. Always wore a ring with a green stone on his little finger. The description matched perfectly with that of the mysterious observer from Café du Monde. Michael and Robert exchanged a meaningful look. "And you say he disappeared at sea?" Robert asked, feeling his heart racing. The old man nodded. "Yes, he went out one day and never came back. They did searches, but no trace was found of him or the boat. Many thought he drowned, but the body was never found." Michael felt he was on the verge of an important discovery. "Sir, do you happen to have any photographs of this Thomas Varley?" The old man thought for a moment, then slowly rose and disappeared into the back of the store. He returned a few minutes later, holding a dusty album. "Here," he said, opening the album to a specific page. "This is the last photo I have of Thomas, taken just before he disappeared." The image showed Thomas Varley standing on the deck of Aurora, smiling broadly at the camera. But he wasn't alone. Next to him, helping to raise the sail, was a younger man with his back to the camera. Robert turned pale when he saw the photograph. With trembling hands, he took it from the old man and looked at it closely. "Michael," he whispered, "it's me. I'm the other man in the photo." Michael felt his breath catch. It was the first concrete evidence of Robert's connection to the mysterious Thomas Varley and the Aurora boat. "Do you remember anything about the day this photograph was taken?" Michael asked, turning to the old store owner. The man shook his head. "I'm sorry it's been so long, but I know it was the last day before Thomas left on that fateful journey. He seemed happy, excited. Said he was going to look for something important." Robert continued to stare at the photograph, with an expression of confusion and pain on his face. "Why can't I remember anything? What happened that day?" Michael put a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him. "We'll find out, Robert. Step by step, we'll reconstruct the story." Thanking the old man for the information and purchasing the photograph, the two brothers left the store, overwhelmed by the new discoveries. "What do you think Thomas Varley was looking for?" Robert asked as they headed back to the hotel. "And why was I with him?" Michael ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know, but I'm sure it's connected to your disappearance. Maybe you left with him on that last journey, and something happened, something that erased your memory." As they walked, Michael noticed a familiar silhouette following them from a distance. It was Eliza Donovan, an ambitious journalist who had repeatedly tried to get an interview with him about Robert's reappearance. "Robert," Michael said quietly, "I think we're being followed. Don't turn around, but we have company." Robert nodded slightly, continuing to walk. "What do we do?" "We go to the hotel. We need to discuss everything we've learned in private and make a plan." Once safely in their hotel room, Michael took out his phone and dialed a number. "Alex, it's Michael Walden. I need your help. I want you to find out everything you can about a Thomas Varley who disappeared at sea about 9 years ago. And I also need you to check if there's any connection between him and our family. Alex Rodriguez was a former intelligence officer, now a private detective, whom Michael had hired in the past for various delicate investigations related to his business. After hanging up, Michael turned to his brother. "Robert, I know it's hard, but you need to try to remember any detail, no matter how small, about Thomas Varley or the Aurora boat." Robert closed his eyes, concentrating. I see a map. An old map with a red X marked on it. And I hear Thomas's voice saying something about a treasure. No, not a treasure, a secret, a family secret." Michael felt goosebumps. A family secret? What could have been so important that it led to Robert's disappearance for 12 years? "There's something else," Robert continued, his eyes still closed. "A name, Elizabeth. Who is Elizabeth?" Michael turned pale. Elizabeth was the name of their grandmother, the one who had given them the crescent necklace. The grandmother who had died a few months before Robert's disappearance, leaving behind a mysterious letter that Michael had never been able to decipher. "Elizabeth was our grandmother," Michael whispered, feeling the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. "She died shortly before you disappeared, and she left behind a strange letter, full of symbols and codes that I could never decipher." Robert's eyes opened suddenly, full of a lucidity that Michael hadn't seen before. "The letter! Michael, we need to see that letter." Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. It was Alex. "Michael, I found something interesting about Thomas Varley," the detective said without introduction. "He was a history professor at Columbia University, specializing in genealogy and family histories. And, surprise, he worked with your grandmother, Elizabeth Walden, on a secret project shortly before her death." Michael felt his breath catch. "Thank you, Alex. Keep digging. I want to know everything you can find out about this project and about the connection between Thomas and our grandmother." After hanging up, Michael told Robert what he had learned. "It seems our grandmother and Thomas Varley were working together on something related to our family history." Robert stood up suddenly, as if electrified by a sudden memory. "Michael, I remember something. Thomas once told me that our family hides a secret that could change the history of the United States. But he never told me what it was." Michael felt his head spinning. A secret that could change the country's history. It seemed unbelievable. And yet, their grandmother came from an old, influential family with deep roots in American history. "Robert, we need to go home," Michael said determinedly. "Grandmother's letter is hidden in the safe in my office. Maybe now, with everything we've learned, we'll finally be able to decipher it." As they hastily packed their bags, Michael again noticed Eliza Donovan's silhouette in the hotel lobby. The journalist seemed to always be one step behind them. Did she suspect something about their discoveries? "We need to be careful," Michael whispered to Robert. "We don't know who else might be interested in our family secret." On the way to the airport, Michael couldn't help but think about the implications of what they had discovered. What secret could be so important that it led to Robert's disappearance and Thomas Varley's apparent death? And why had their grandmother chosen to keep everything hidden, leaving behind only a coded letter? Robert, on the other hand, seemed lost in his own thoughts, trying to catch the fragments of memories that were beginning to return. "Michael," he said suddenly, "I think I know why I left New Orleans 9 years ago. I think I discovered something dangerous, and I ran to protect the family." Michael looked long at his brother. "What exactly did you discover, Robert?" "I don't remember exactly, but I know it was related to an old document, very old, and to a location, a hidden place somewhere in the mountains." As the plane rose above New Orleans, Michael felt he was on the verge of a discovery that would change their lives forever. The Walden family secret, whatever it was about to come to light after generations of silence. What awaited them in New York? Would they be able to decipher their grandmother's letter? And more importantly, would they be prepared for the consequences of their discovery? As the clouds parted beneath them, Michael silently promised himself that he would do everything in his power to uncover the truth and protect Robert, no matter the cost. For despite the years of separation, the blood bond between them remained as strong as ever. The Walden family mansion in the Hamptons seemed unchanged, an island of tranquility in the bustle of New York's elite playground. But for Michael and Robert, who were now walking up the main driveway, everything seemed different. Every shadow hid a potential secret. Every rustle of leaves could be a warning. Mrs. Thompson greeted them at the door, her eyes moist with emotion at the sight of Robert. "Welcome home, gentlemen," she said in a trembling voice. "Is everything all right?" Michael smiled reassuringly. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson. We just have some urgent business to take care of. Please don't disturb us and don't let anyone in, no matter who it is." Once in Michael's office, he went straight to the imposing painting that concealed the safe. With quick movements, he entered the code and opened the metal door. From inside, he took out a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the Walden family crest. "This is it," he said, handing the envelope to Robert. "Grandmother Elizabeth's letter." With trembling hands, Robert broke the seal and took out several sheets covered with tiny writing and strange symbols. "It's a code," he murmured, studying each page carefully. "But I think I recognize it. Michael, I think I know how to decipher it." For hours, the two brothers worked feverishly to decipher their grandmother's hidden message. Robert seemed to have a special intuition for the code, as if part of him remembered how to read it. Finally, when the first rays of dawn began to penetrate the office windows, Robert stood up abruptly, holding the last page of the letter. "Michael," he said in a voice trembling with emotion, "we've done it. I know what our family is hiding." Michael looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Tell me, Robert, what is the great secret of the Walden family?" Robert took a deep breath before beginning. "Our family descends from a secret line of the founding fathers. Grandmother Elizabeth was, in fact, the direct granddaughter of an illegitimate son of Alexander Hamilton. This son was hidden and raised in secret to protect him from political intrigues." Michael felt his breath catch. "But that means we—" "Yes," Robert confirmed. "We are direct heirs to one of the founding fathers. But that's not all. There's a document, a legitimation act signed by Hamilton himself, which confirms our descent and our right to a significant historical legacy. This document has been hidden for generations to protect the family from potential dangers." Michael collapsed into his chair, overwhelmed by the implications of this discovery. "Where is this document now?" Robert ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "That's the part I still don't clearly remember. But I know it's connected to my journey with Thomas Varley. I think we found part of it, and that's why I disappeared, to protect the secret and to find the rest of the document." Suddenly, everything began to make sense to Michael. Robert's mysterious disappearance, Thomas Varley's obsessive interest, even their grandmother's reluctance to talk about the family's past. "But why would grandmother hide all this from us?" Michael asked. "To protect us," Robert answered. "Think about it, Michael. If it became known that there are legitimate heirs to one of the founding fathers with potentially game-changing historical documents, what do you think would happen? It would be chaos. Some would want to elevate us, others would want to see us silenced. The country could be thrown into conflict." Michael stood up and began pacing the office, trying to process all the information. "What do we do now, Robert? How do we proceed with this information?" Before Robert could answer, there was a loud knock on the office door. "Mrs. Thompson's frightened voice sounded from beyond. "Mr. Michael, Mr. Robert, it's urgent. There are some people here who insist on seeing you. They say it's a matter of national security." The two brothers exchanged alarmed glances. Michael quickly moved towards the door, but not before signaling Robert to hide the letter and their notes. "Who are you?" Michael asked, opening the door cautiously. In front of him stood two men in somber suits, with grave expressions on their faces. One of them showed a badge. "I'm Agent John Peterson from the FBI," he said in an authoritative voice, "and this is Agent Mark Collins. We need to urgently discuss with you and your brother, Mr. Walden." Michael felt a knot in his stomach, but maintained his apparent calm. "What is this about, gentlemen?" Agent Peterson glanced quickly around the office before answering. "It's about national security, Mr. Walden. We've received information that you might be in possession of some sensitive documents that could have major implications for our country." Robert, who had been silent until then, stepped forward. "What kind of documents?" Agent Collins intervened. "Documents related to your family history and possible connections to the founding fathers." Michael and Robert exchanged a quick glance. How had the authorities found out about their discovery so quickly? "Gentlemen," Michael said, trying to buy time. "I don't know what you're talking about. We are just a family of businessmen with no connection to the founding fathers." Agent Peterson smiled slightly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Walden, let's not play cat and mouse. We know about your trip to New Orleans, about your meeting with your grandmother's old friend, Thomas Varley, and about the coded letter you've just deciphered." Robert took a step back, shocked. "How? We have our sources," the agent continued. "And now we ask you to hand over all documents related to this discovery. It's crucial for state security." Michael felt anger rising within him. "And if we refuse?" Agent Peterson's expression darkened. "Then we'll be forced to take more drastic measures. You understand, Mr. Walden, that the information you possess could destabilize the entire country if it falls into the wrong hands." At that moment, there was new commotion at the front door. "Mrs." Thompson's voice sounded again, this time more alarmed. "Mr. Michael, it's Ms. Eliza Donovan from the New York Times. She says she has crucial information for you." Agent Peterson's hand moved to his gun holster, looking nervously towards the door. "What's going on here, Mr. Walden? Who else knows about this?" Michael raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Please calm down, Agent Peterson. Nobody knows anything concrete. Let's discuss this situation civilly." Robert, meanwhile, moved slowly towards the office window, looking outside. His eyes widened when he saw several black cars parked in front of the mansion. "Michael," he whispered, "I think we're surrounded." The tension in the room was growing with each second. Michael knew they had to make a quick decision. Should they hand over the documents to the authorities and risk the truth being buried forever? Or should they try to keep the family secret, risking severe consequences? In that moment of crisis, the two brothers' eyes met. In a fraction of a second, a tacit understanding passed between them. They needed time to fully understand the implications of their discovery and to decide the best course of action. Michael turned to Agent Peterson, adopting a more conciliatory attitude. "Agent Peterson, I understand the gravity of the situation, but please try to understand our position as well. We've discovered information that has shaken our entire existence. We need a little time to process everything and to offer you a complete picture." The agent seemed to weigh Michael's words for a moment. "How much time do you need?" 24 hours, Michael replied firmly. "I promise that within this time frame we will contact you and provide all relevant information." Agent Collins seemed ready to protest, but Agent Peterson raised a hand to stop him. "All right, Mr. Walden, you have 24 hours, but I warn you, if you try to flee or make anything public about what you've discovered, the consequences will be severe." With these words, the two FBI agents headed for the exit. Before leaving the room, Agent Peterson turned for one last look. "Oh, and Mr. Walden, I suggest you don't talk to the press, for everyone's sake." Once alone, Michael collapsed into his chair, feeling exhausted. Robert approached his brother, putting a hand on his shoulder. "What do we do now, Michael?" Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts. When he opened them again, a new determination could be read in his gaze. "Now, Robert, we play the most important game of our lives. We have 24 hours to decide the fate of a secret that has survived for generations. And regardless of what we choose, nothing will be the same after this." As the sun rose over the Hamptons, casting long shadows over the Walden mansion, the two brothers knew they were at the beginning of the most important day of their lives, a day that could change not only their destiny, but also that of the entire country. 24 hours, 1,440 minutes. That's all Michael and Robert had left to make a decision that could change the course of American history. They spent the first few hours analyzing every detail of their grandmother's letter, looking for clues about the exact location of the Hamilton document. Robert had sporadic flashbacks, fragmented memories from his time with Thomas Varley. "The Adirondacks," he murmured at one point, staring into space. "I think that's where we hid part of the document." Michael scribbled feverishly. "Good. It's a start. But why did you split it up? And where's the other part?" Robert shook his head, frustrated. "I don't remember clearly. I just know I felt the need to protect it, to split it up so that no one could use the complete information." While they were discussing, Michael received an encrypted message from Alex, the private detective. He had discovered that Thomas Varley hadn't actually died in that sea accident. There was evidence that he was living under a false identity in an isolated village in the Adirondack Mountains. "We need to talk to him," Michael said determinedly. "He's the only person who knows the whole story." But how could they reach Thomas without attracting the authorities' attention? And more importantly, how should they decide what to do with the information they possessed? As the hours passed, the tension grew. Eliza Donovan continued to call and send messages, insisting she had vital information for them. Michael was tempted to contact her, but he knew that any wrong move could put them in danger. With only 6 hours left until the FBI's ultimatum expired, Robert had a revelation. "Michael, I think I know why Grandmother left us this secret. Not to claim a legacy, but to decide if America is ready to know the truth." Michael looked at his brother intently. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Robert continued. "If Grandmother had wanted our family to claim this legacy, she would have told us directly. But she chose to encode the message, to hide it. She gave us the possibility to choose." Michael began to understand. "You mean we have to decide whether to make the truth public or keep it secret?" Robert nodded. "Exactly. And I think I know what we need to do." In the next few hours, the two brothers elaborated a bold plan. With Alex's help, they managed to arrange a secret meeting with Thomas Varley. Using Michael's business connections, they prepared a media strategy that would allow them to control the narrative if they decided to go public with the truth. With only 30 minutes left before the ultimatum expired, Michael and Robert stood face to face in their office, ready to make the final decision. "Are you sure about this, Robert?" Michael asked, looking into his brother's eyes. Robert smiled slightly, more sure than ever. "It's time to honor the sacrifices of our grandmother and all those who kept this secret before us." Michael took a deep breath and dialed Agent Peterson's number. "Agent Peterson," he said in a calm voice, "we're ready to meet with you. But not just you. We want a meeting with the President, the Speaker of the House, and representatives of the press. It's time for America to know the truth." In the hours that followed, events unfolded at a dizzying pace. In a historic press conference, Michael and Robert Walden revealed to the whole world the truth about their origins. They presented the documents they had found, including the Legitimation Act signed by Alexander Hamilton, which Thomas Varley had kept safe all these years. But to everyone's surprise, they didn't claim any special status or rights. Instead, they proposed the creation of a national commission of historians and constitutional experts to study the documents and their implications for American history. "We don't want to impose anything," Robert declared in front of the cameras. "We only want America to know its true history and have the chance to decide for itself what this means for our nation's future." Their revelations shook America to its core. In the weeks that followed, the country was engulfed in heated debates. Historians analyzed every detail of their story, while politicians and analysts discussed the long-term implications. Michael and Robert became overnight the most discussed personalities in the country. Some saw them as heroes who had the courage to tell the truth. Others accused them of destabilizing the nation. But for the two brothers, the most important achievement was rediscovering their bond. After years of separation and confusion, they were united again, facing together the challenges that lay ahead. On a quiet evening, a few months after their revelations, Michael and Robert sat on the terrace of the mansion, watching the sunset over the Hamptons. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Michael asked, sipping from his glass of wine. Robert smiled, putting a hand on his brother's shoulder. "I think we did exactly what Grandmother Elizabeth would have wanted us to do. We gave America the chance to know its past and choose its future." In the distance, the lights of New York City began to twinkle, symbolizing perhaps the hope of a new beginning for the country. Whatever the future might bring, Michael and Robert knew they would face it together, united by bonds stronger than the founding blood that flowed through their veins, the bonds of brotherly love and truth.